In this video, we'll conduct an examination of serial killers who were executed in the United States. We'll explore their crimes, their final words, and the last meals they requested before facing justice. Make sure you're subscribed, and let's get into it. Judy Buenoano. Judy Buenoano, nicknamed the Black Widow, was one of America's most dangerous female serial killers. Her killing career began in 1971 in Orlando, Florida. Her husband, Air Force Sergeant James Goodyear, had just returned from Vietnam when Judy began secretly dosing his food with arsenic. Over months, Goodyear suffered violent illness, nausea, vomiting, and deteriorating health that baffled doctors. On September 16, 1971, James Goodyear died. His death was initially ruled natural, attributed to Agent Orange exposure from Vietnam. Judy collected sizable life insurance payouts and played the grieving widow perfectly. In 1973, she moved to Colorado with her boyfriend Bobby Joe Morris. History repeated itself in 1978 when Morris died after a sudden bout of mysterious illness. Later investigations would reveal Judy had poisoned him as well, again profiting from insurance. The most heartless of her crimes involved her own son. In 1980, Judy's 19-year-old son Michael Goodyear, James's son, was hospitalized with mysterious paralysis. Tests would later reveal arsenic poisoning had severely weakened him. Upon his release from the hospital, while still partially paralyzed, Judy suggested a canoe trip on a river. The canoe accidentally capsized. Unable to swim due to his paralysis, Michael drowned on May 13, 1980. Judy collected approximately $100,000 in insurance money from her son's death. By 1981, Judy had opened a beauty salon in Pensacola and gotten engaged to John Gentry. In 1983, she gave Gentry capsules she claimed were vitamins. They were, of course, laced with arsenic, making him violently ill in the same fashion as every previous victim. When the poison didn't kill him fast enough, Judy tried a more direct approach. She rigged his car with a pipe bomb. On June 25, 1983, the bomb exploded, seriously injuring Gentry but failing to kill him. This would be her undoing. Police, now suspicious, launched a full investigation. They exhumed the bodies of James Goodyear and Michael Buenoano, finding lethal levels of arsenic in both. In 1984, Judy Buenoano was convicted of first-degree murder for poisoning her husband and sentenced to death. She received a life sentence for drowning Michael and 12 years for the attempted car bombing of Gentry. Throughout her appeals, Buenoano maintained her innocence, even as evidence mounted against her. But Florida pressed on and set her execution date. On March 30, 1998, at age 54, Judy Buenoano was executed in Florida's electric chair, Old Sparky. She was the first woman executed in Florida in 150 years. Her last meal consisted of steamed broccoli, asparagus, strawberries, tomato wedges, and hot tea with lemon. When strapped into the electric chair and asked for final words, Judy answered in a soft, shaky voice, "No, sir." She shut her eyes tightly and said nothing more. At 7:08 a.m., 2,000 volts coursed through her body for 38 seconds. Smoke rose from a strap on her leg as the current flowed. Judy Buenoano was pronounced dead at 7:13 a.m. She had murdered 3 people, her husband, son, and boyfriend, and attempted to murder her fiancé, all for money. To the end, she never admitted guilt nor expressed remorse. Primetime Crime. You heard that right. When I created this channel, I never imagined I'd end up in one of my own videos, but here we are. A few weeks ago, I received a comment under one of my videos. Disturbingly, it was supportive of a criminal who had mistreated a child, and hostile toward the police officers who risked their lives to bring him to justice. I usually ignore hurtful comments, but this time I replied, condemning the criminal's behavior and standing up for the officers involved. Only a few hours later, I got an email on my personal email address that I try to keep private. It included my full name, my city, and threats telling me to delete my garbage. The same person who had praised a killer was now threatening me. They had found my information online, likely through a data broker who sold it to them for a few dollars. Luckily, our channel sponsor, Aura, reached out the next week and the timing couldn't have been better. I want to say thank you very much to Aura for protecting my private information and for supporting the channel. Aura is an all-in-one digital security service that protects your personal information from exactly these kinds of online threats. They scan the internet, including those data broker sites and the dark web, to make sure your private information stays private, and if they find anyone selling your information or your family's information, they automatically submit removal requests to get it taken down. Thanks to Aura, I found 34 sites listing my name, address history, and even the information of my relatives. In a few clicks, Aura sent out removal requests for me. I was a bit nervous posting on YouTube, and receiving that email only made me more nervous, but thanks to Aura, I feel safe sharing my videos again. Not to mention, I used to use a separate VPN, antivirus, and password manager, but Aura has their own built-in, so I was able to cancel 3 extra subscriptions and save money. They also offer real-time alerts for suspicious credit or banking activity. And if anything ever does go wrong, they've got your back with $5 million in identity theft insurance and 24/7 US-based support. If you want to see who is selling your information online, with my link you can try Aura completely free for 14 days at aura.com/primetimecrime. My link will be in the description and pinned comments too for easy access. Thanks to Aura for sponsoring this video and helping keep this channel, and people like me, protected from everyday threats. Now, let's get back to the video. Andrew Kokoraleis. Andrew Kokoraleis was a member of the notorious Ripper Crew, a satanic cult that terrorized Chicago with a series of ritualistic murders in the early 1980s. Between 1981 and 1982, the Ripper Crew, consisting of 4 men, abducted, raped, tortured, and murdered women in the Chicago area. The crimes were marked by extreme sadism and occult elements that shocked even hardened investigators. The group's victims were typically young women lured or snatched off the streets. They would be subjected to horrific torture before being murdered. In total, the Ripper Crew was believed responsible for the deaths of 18 women, though Kokoraleis himself was linked to at least 3 confirmed murders through physical evidence and confessions. One of Kokoraleis' known victims was Rose Davis, a 30-year-old woman whose body was found in 1982. Kokoraleis admitted to stabbing her. Another victim was 21-year-old Lorraine Borowski, a secretary abducted in broad daylight in 1982. Her decomposed body was later found in a cemetery. The cult's practices were particularly disturbing. Kokoraleis confessed to participating in rituals where victims' breasts were amputated as part of satanic ceremonies. The level of depravity stunned investigators. Andrew Kokoraleis was arrested in 1982 after fleeing a police stop in a van connected to a survivor's attack. Once in custody, he confessed in chilling detail to several of the crew's crimes. In 1987, Kokoraleis was convicted of Lorraine Borowski's murder and received the death penalty. His older brother Thomas and 2 other crew members, leader Robin Gecht and Edward Spreitzer, were also convicted in related murders, though only Andrew received a death sentence. Andrew's case went through standard appeals, all of which were denied. In early 1999, Illinois Governor George Ryan, who personally opposed the death penalty, allowed the execution to proceed. On March 17, 1999, 35-year-old Andrew Kokoraleis was executed by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center in Illinois. He had no special last meal request, taking only regular prison fare. Strapped to the gurney, Kokoraleis made a final statement. "To the Borowski family, I am truly sorry for your loss. I mean this sincerely," and added, "Repent ye, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." Andrew Kokoraleis was pronounced dead at 12:34 a.m. Jose Medellin. Jose Ernesto Medellin was one of several perpetrators of the horrific 1993 gang rape and murder of two teenage girls in Houston that became known as the Railroad Murders. On the night of June 24, 1993, Medellin, then 18, and 5 fellow gang members who called themselves the Black and White Gang were drinking near T.C. Jester Park when they encountered Jennifer and Elizabeth. The two girls, Jennifer Ertman on the left and Elizabeth Pena on the right, were simply walking home, taking a shortcut through the park. A simple decision that would cost them their lives. The gang ambushed the girls and subjected them to an hour-long ordeal of unimaginable brutality. Both girls were raped repeatedly by multiple gang members, beaten, and finally strangled to death using a belt and shoelaces. After murdering the girls, the gang members dumped their bodies in a wooded area and left them to decompose. Medellin and others then went to a party, where Medellin bragged about the crime, boasts that would lead to his capture. The girls' bodies were found 4 days later. Medellin was arrested about a week after the murders when tips led police to him. He confessed in detail to raping both girls and strangling one of them. In 1994, Medellin was convicted of capital murder for Elizabeth Pena's killing and sentenced to death. His fellow gang members also received death sentences or long prison terms. Medellin's case gained international attention because he was a Mexican citizen who had not been informed of his right to consular notification. This issue went all the way to the International Court of Justice and even involved presidential intervention, but ultimately U.S. courts ruled it did not invalidate his conviction. After 15 years of appeals, Medellin's execution was scheduled. On August 5, 2008, at age 33, Jose Medellin was executed by lethal injection in Texas. For his last meal, he requested chicken enchiladas, rice, jalapeno peppers, and soda. In the death chamber, Medellin offered a brief final statement in both English and Spanish. He apologized to the victims' families. "I am sorry my actions caused pain. I hope this brings closure to what you seek. Don't ever hate them for what they do. Never harbor hate. I love you. All right, Warden." Jose Medellin was pronounced dead at 9:57 p.m. The families of Jennifer and Elizabeth were present, and later stated that while the execution brought some measure of justice, nothing could truly heal the loss of their daughters. Derek Sean O'Brien. Derek Sean O'Brien was another member of the Black and White Gang who participated in the brutal 1993 rape and murder of Jennifer Ertman and Elizabeth Pena in Houston. O'Brien, who was 18 at the time, played an active role in the horrific crime. Evidence showed that he personally strangled Jennifer with a belt, while other gang members garroted Elizabeth with shoelaces. Both girls were viciously beaten and raped before being killed. Like his fellow gang members, O'Brien showed no remorse immediately after the murders. He attended the same party and boasted about the killings with his friends. O'Brien was arrested within days of the murders. In 1994, he was convicted of capital murder for Jennifer's death and sentenced to death by a Texas jury. Over the next 12 years, O'Brien pursued appeals, including claims of mental impairment, but all were denied. By 2006, he was the first of the gang members to face execution. On July 11, 2006, 31-year-old Derek O'Brien was executed by lethal injection in Huntsville, Texas. O'Brien declined a last meal and showed genuine remorse in his final moments. "I am sorry. I have always been sorry. It is the worst mistake that I ever made in my whole life. Not because I am here, but because of what I did, and I hurt a lot of people, you and my family." He looked directly at the Ertman and Pena families. "I hope you can look at me and know I am truly sorry." As the lethal drugs were administered, one of the victim's fathers angrily shouted, "Punk!" at O'Brien. He was pronounced dead at 6:19 p.m. Gerald Stano. Gerald Eugene Stano's confessions to 41 murders made him potentially one of the most prolific serial killers in American history, though authorities could only definitively link him to 22 deaths. Operating primarily in Florida during the 1970s, with additional murders in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, Stano targeted mainly young women. His victims were often hitchhikers or sex workers, women he saw as vulnerable and disposable. Stano's methods varied. He would pick up women, then stab, strangle, or shoot them. Bodies were dumped in remote areas, sometimes not found for months or years. The geographic spread and varying methods initially prevented investigators from connecting the crimes. His killing career appeared to span from 1969 to 1980, though not all his confessions could be verified. Stano was finally arrested in 1980 after attempting to abduct a woman who managed to escape. Once in custody, he began confessing to murder after murder, providing details that only the killer would know in many cases. He was convicted of a 1974 murder and later pleaded guilty to multiple other killings. He received numerous life sentences and 3 death sentences, one of which was ultimately carried out. On March 23, 1998, Gerald Stano was executed in Florida's electric chair. For his last meal, he requested a large dinner: Delmonico steak, a baked potato with sour cream and bacon bits, tossed salad with Roquefort dressing, buttered lima beans, mint chocolate chip ice cream, and a 2-liter Pepsi. Notably, he consumed the entire half-gallon of ice cream. Stano's final statement proclaimed innocence and directed blame to lead investigator. He stated, "I am innocent. I am frightened. I was threatened, and I was held month after month without any real legal representation. I confessed to crimes I did not commit." Philip Lee Ingle. Philip Lee Ingle's case highlighted the intersection of mental illness and murder when he killed 4 people in a single night of violence in rural North Carolina. On February 12, 1991, Ingle, suffering from schizophrenic delusions, went on a rampage. He believed he was on a mission from God to destroy demons and evil. His victims were 2 elderly couples, Ralph and Zelda Bishop, both in their 80s, and Voight and Lois Gilbreth in their 60s. These were innocent people whose only crime was being home, when Ingle's delusions drove him to kill. Ingle broke into both homes and attacked his victims with knives and a hatchet. The brutality of the attacks was extreme, with multiple wounds inflicted on each victim. The crime scenes were among the worst investigators had seen. When police arrived at the second home, they found Ingle still at the scene, covered in blood and incoherent. He immediately surrendered, making no attempt to flee or resist arrest. Despite clear evidence of severe mental illness, including a diagnosis of schizophrenia, Ingle was found legally sane and fit to stand trial. The jury convicted him of 4 counts of first-degree murder. On August 22, 1995, Philip Ingle was executed by lethal injection in North Carolina. His last meal request was humble and nostalgic: Cheerwine soda and cheese doodles, favorites from his North Carolina childhood. He consumed them while smiling oddly, saying they reminded him of happier times. His final words were long-winded, but in some he said, "I do not believe in capital punishment even though I have chosen to end my appeals soon. The only reason I have done this is so that the victims' families can maybe find some peace. I have repented my sins. I have been forgiven. I do not fear death now. I am not shaking. I am being put to sleep, and the angels are going to pick me up and take me to heaven. I forgive you and everyone, and I ask that everyone who I have trespassed against to forgive me." Danny Barber. Danny Barber's crimes between 1978 and 1980 in Dallas County included not just murder, but horrifyingly, acts of necrophilia. Barber targeted women primarily, though he also killed one man who was a witness to his crimes. His victims were attacked during home invasions and robberies, but the sexual violence continued even after death. In 2 documented cases, Barber had intercourse with his female victims after murdering them. This behavior shocked even experienced investigators and prosecutors. His final victim in 1980 was a young mother. Barber broke into her home, assaulted and murdered her while her infant child lay nearby. Miraculously, he left the baby unharmed, though the child was orphaned by his actions. Barber's crime spree ended when a surviving victim managed to identify his vehicle. This led to his arrest and subsequent confession to the murders. At trial, prosecutors presented graphic evidence of the necrophilia, ensuring the jury understood the full depravity of Barber's actions and virtually guaranteed a death sentence. On February 11, 1999, Danny Barber was executed by lethal injection in Texas. His last meal was fried chicken, fried okra, mashed potatoes with gravy, biscuits with honey, and a Pepsi. He ate quietly, commenting that it tasted just like Mom used to make. His final words were, "I'm regretful for what I done, but I'm a different person from that time. I've got some people over here that believes that. I want to talk to my friends over here for a second. Well, it's good to see you guys. Look after Mary Lynn for me. Like I said, I've called my mother already, so she knows. Goodbye." Leon Dorsey. Leon Dorsey, IV's execution drew particular attention for the fact that an innocent man was initially jailed for his crimes. On April 4, 1994, the 18-year-old Dorsey entered a Blockbuster video store in Dallas at closing time. He forced employees Brad Lindsay, 20, and James Armstrong, 26, into a back room at gunpoint. Without provocation or hesitation, Dorsey executed both young men with gunshots to the head. His take from the robbery was approximately $392, less than $200 per life. The crime went unsolved for years. In a terrible miscarriage of justice, another man was arrested and jailed for the murders based on mistaken eyewitness identification. The case was cracked when Dorsey, imprisoned for another robbery, began bragging about the Blockbuster murders to fellow inmates. His boasts reached investigators, who reopened the case. When confronted with ballistic evidence and his own fingerprints from the scene, Dorsey's response was a smirking, "You got me." He showed no remorse for the victims or for the innocent man who had been wrongly imprisoned. On August 12, 2008, Leon Dorsey was executed by lethal injection in Texas. For his last meal, he requested cheese pizza, a dozen tacos, and chocolate cake. He shared portions with a cousin who visited and joked that it was better than Mom's cooking. His final statement was to the spectators of his execution, "I love all y'all. I forgive all y'all. See y'all when you get there." Stephen Wayne Anderson. Stephen Wayne Anderson was a career criminal whose murder count reached at least 9 across multiple states, making him one of California's most dangerous killers. Anderson's criminal career included escaping from a Utah prison where he was serving time for murder. Once free, he continued his killing spree, showing that incarceration had taught him nothing. His most notorious crime occurred in 1979 in Bloomington, California. Anderson broke into the home of 81-year-old Elizabeth Lyman. He surprised her in her kitchen and shot her dead. But then, Anderson prepared himself a meal of noodles and beer in the kitchen while Mrs. Lyman's body lay nearby. This callous indifference epitomized Anderson's sociopathy. In addition to the Lyman murder, Anderson admitted to killing 6 other people, including fellow prison inmates and victims of contract killings. His total body count may have been even higher. Anderson was finally caught shortly after the Lyman murder when neighbors reported hearing gunshots. After a brief standoff with police, he surrendered. During his years on death row, Anderson became known for his poetry and philosophical writings about death and mortality. His intellectual pursuits couldn't mask the brutality of his crimes. On January 29, 2002, Stephen Anderson became the first person executed in California that year. His last meal request became famous for its peculiarity: 2 grilled cheese sandwiches, a pint of cottage cheese, a hominy corn mixture, a slice of peach pie, a pint of chocolate chip ice cream, and radishes. He ate everything, even the radishes, commenting it was the best meal he'd had in years. He chose to make no final statement. Franklin Dwayne Alex. Franklin Dwayne Alex terrorized Houston, Texas, during a 6-month crime spree between 1997 and 1998 that left multiple people dead and countless others traumatized. Alex's method was particularly cruel. Armed with a pistol, he would target residents of apartment complexes, often following a pattern of escalating violence. He would rob his victims, and in many cases, the robberies turned deadly. One of his most horrific crimes occurred when he abducted a woman at gunpoint from an apartment complex. He forced her into the trunk of a car, where he sexually assaulted her. After the assault, he returned with her to her home to steal electronics and other valuables. This burglary took a deadly turn when the woman's brother, Eric Bridgeford, arrived at the scene. Alex didn't hesitate. He chased Bridgeford down and shot him in the chest. Eric Bridgeford bled to death, while Alex calmly hid the murder weapon nearby, later leading police to it during his confession. But Bridgeford's murder was just one episode in Alex's rampage. Over the course of 6 months, investigators linked him to 4 murders, 2 attempted murders, 8 aggravated robberies, 1 additional robbery, 2 aggravated sexual assaults, and 4 kidnappings. Among his victims was Christopher Thomas, whose connection to the case was particularly tragic. He was the brother of one of Alex's sexual assault victims. Alex was finally apprehended on January 6, 1998, bringing his reign of terror to an end. During his capital murder trial for killing Eric Bridgeford, prosecutors presented evidence of his broader crime pattern, including DNA evidence linking him to other murders. The jury convicted him, and in September 1998, they sentenced him to death. Alex spent over a decade on death row as his appeals worked through the system. His attorneys even challenged the reliability of forensic lab work in one of the additional murder cases, but all appeals ultimately failed. On March 30, 2010, 34-year-old Franklin Alex was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. He declined any special last meal request. In his final moments strapped to the gurney, Alex addressed both his own family and his victims' families. His words were a mix of apology and denial. "I am not the monster they made me out to be. I made lots of mistakes that took your son. I messed up, made poor choices. No rapes, I don't do drugs, I am not an alcoholic." He claimed to have found peace, saying, I am not the monster they made me out to be. I made lots of mistakes that took your son. I messed up, made poor choices. I'll take it to the grave. I will be at peace. It is what it is. I got peace in my heart. Franklin Alex was pronounced dead at 6:20 p.m. Ronald Allridge. Ronald Keith Allridge, along with his brother James, created a criminal partnership that terrorized Fort Worth, Texas, with a string of violent robberies and murders spanning from the late 1970s through the mid-1980s. Between 1976 and 1985, the Allridge brothers committed at least 3 murders during their armed holdups of various businesses. Their crimes were marked by unnecessary violence. Even when victims complied, the brothers often killed them anyway. Their final crime occurred in 1985, when Ronald, armed with a gun, robbed a Fort Worth restaurant. The manager, Carla McMillan, posed no threat and was cooperating with his demands. Despite this, Ronald executed her with a shot to the head. This senseless murder would be his undoing. Ronald was arrested soon after McMillan's death, and investigators were able to link him to 2 earlier robbery murders through ballistic evidence and witness testimony. In 1986, Ronald Allridge was convicted of capital murder for McMillan's slaying and sentenced to death. His brother James received a life sentence for related crimes, but would later also be executed for a separate murder. Ronald's appeals through state and federal courts proved unsuccessful. After nearly a decade on death row, his execution date arrived. On June 8, 1995, 34-year-old Ronald Allridge was executed by lethal injection in Huntsville, Texas. He declined a last meal and a final statement. Witnesses reported that he remained mostly silent in the death chamber, offering neither an apology nor final words to anyone present. Ronald Allridge was pronounced dead at 12:17 a.m. John Errol Ferguson. John Errol Ferguson was responsible for 2 separate mass murders in the Miami area in 1977 and 1978. Crimes so brutal, they shocked even hardened investigators. Ferguson, a former mental patient, orchestrated his first massacre on July 27, 1977. Along with accomplices, he invaded a home in Carroll City, Miami-Dade County, supposedly to steal drugs and cash. What followed was a bloodbath. Inside the house were 6 people, mostly friends between the ages of 17 and 35, who had gathered socially. Ferguson and his accomplices bound and blindfolded all 6 victims before systematically executing them with gunshots. One teenage girl survived the massacre, but not unscathed. Ferguson had raped her and left her for dead. Her survival and subsequent identification of Ferguson would prove crucial to the case. 13 months later, on January 8, 1978, Ferguson struck again. This time, he targeted a young couple returning from church in Hialeah, 17-year-old Belinda Worley and 19-year-old Brian Glenfeld. Ferguson abducted the teenagers, raped Belinda, then shot both of them to death. He dumped their bodies in the Everglades, showing the same callous disregard for human life that marked his earlier crimes. Police captured Ferguson shortly after the second murders when they linked him to the crimes through a stolen vehicle and eyewitness testimony. In 1978, he was convicted of the Hialeah double murder and received 2 death sentences. The following year, he received 6 more death sentences for the Carroll City massacre. Ferguson spent over 35 years on Florida's death row, one of the longest stays in the state's history. Throughout this time, his attorneys argued he was severely mentally ill, suffering from schizophrenia and believing he was the Prince of God. Courts, however, found that despite his delusions, Ferguson understood the nature of his punishment. After multiple stays and interventions by human rights groups, all appeals were exhausted. On August 5, 2013, 65-year-old John Ferguson was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. He declined a special last meal, eating only the standard prison dinner consisting of a meat patty with white bread, steamed tomatoes, potato salad, diced carrots, and iced tea. When asked for a final statement, Ferguson delivered words that reflected his decades-long delusion. "I just want everyone to know that I am the Prince of God and I will rise again." John Ferguson was pronounced dead at 6:17 p.m., ending one of Florida's longest-running capital cases. Reginald Perkins. Reginald Perkins was a convicted rapist whose violent tendencies escalated to serial murder, leaving a trail of victims across both Ohio and Texas. Perkins' criminal history began early. In 1980, he pleaded guilty to raping and attempting to rape two 12-year-old girls in Ohio, crimes that sent him to prison for years. But authorities suspected him of much more. In Cleveland, Ohio, between 1980 and 1981, 2 women and 1 man were strangled under circumstances that pointed directly to Perkins. He had been romantically involved with one victim's twin sister and was present when another victim was killed. Despite these suspicions, Perkins wasn't formally charged with these murders at the time. After his parole, he moved to Fort Worth, Texas, seeking a fresh start. Instead, he brought death with him. In December 2000, just 10 months after being released from prison, Perkins murdered his 64-year-old stepmother, Gertie Perkins. He strangled her with a belt, then hid her body in the trunk of her own car. Perkins might have gotten away with it, but greed betrayed him. He pawned his stepmother's wedding ring and forged checks on the family business account. When confronted by police and his father about Gertie's whereabouts, Perkins himself led them to her body in the Cadillac's trunk. His arrest opened a Pandora's box of evidence. DNA testing linked him to the unsolved 1991 strangling murders of 2 Fort Worth women, bringing his confirmed murder count to at least 3. At his 2002 trial for his stepmother's murder, prosecutors presented evidence of the additional killings. The Texas jury had no difficulty reaching a verdict: guilty, with a sentence of death. Throughout his years on death row, Perkins maintained his innocence in all the murders, despite the overwhelming evidence against him. On January 22, 2009, at age 53, Reginald Perkins was executed by lethal injection in Huntsville, Texas. For his last meal, Perkins requested an enormous feast: 24 barbecue hot wings, 2 cheeseburgers all the way, 4 slices of jalapeno pizza, 3 slices of buttered toast, 1 sweet potato pie, sherbet rainbow ice cream, and 12 sodas, Dr. Peppers and Big Red. An hour before his execution, Perkins gave a final statement to a warden, still protesting his innocence. "They didn't link me to nothing. I did not kill my stepmom, I loved her. Texas is going to kill an innocent man." In the death chamber, when asked for last words, Perkins refused to repeat himself, saying simply, "I already made my statement, appreciate it, love y'all." As the lethal drugs began flowing, he commented, "I can feel it going in." Just before losing consciousness, he looked at his victim's sister, who was witnessing the execution before losing consciousness. Reginald Perkins was pronounced dead at 6:24 p.m. Joseph Atkins. Joseph Ernest Atkins earned his place on death row by murdering members of his own family and a neighbor child over a span of years in South Carolina. Atkins had a history of family violence dating back to 1969. At age 22, he shot and killed his half-brother. Despite the severity of this crime, he was convicted only of manslaughter and served a short prison term. After his release, Atkins settled in Goose Creek, South Carolina, living with his adoptive family. but the violence that had claimed his half-brother's life was far from over. On October 27, 1985, Atkins flew into a drunken rage. He grabbed a shotgun and murdered his 75-year-old adoptive father, Benjamin Atkins, with a blast that ended the elderly man's life instantly. But Atkins wasn't finished. He went next door, where 13-year-old Karen Patterson lay sleeping in her bed. Karen had been like a niece to him. He had even served as her babysitter. None of that mattered now. Atkins shot the child in the head with a rifle as she lay in bed, apparently to punish her family for some minor dispute. The senselessness of murdering a sleeping child shocked the community. After these killings, Atkins engaged in an armed standoff with police, holding officers at bay for hours before finally surrendering. In 1986, he was tried for Karen Patterson's murder. Her age made it a capital offense, and the jury showed no mercy. They found him guilty and recommended death. He also received a life sentence for killing his adoptive father. Atkins spent over a decade on death row as his case wound through appeals. His attorneys raised issues of mental illness and alcoholism, but the courts found these arguments insufficient to overturn his sentence. On January 22, 1999, 51-year-old Joseph Atkins was executed in South Carolina's electric chair at the Department of Corrections in Columbia. His final meal consisted of steak, baked potato, salad, peaches, and vanilla ice cream. A fairly ordinary dinner by his request. When asked for last words, Atkins quietly declined to make a formal statement. According to prison officials, he had expressed remorse in a private prayer shortly before execution, but he chose not to address the public or his victims' families in the chamber. Joseph Atkins was pronounced dead at 6:13 a.m., becoming the first person executed in South Carolina that year. His confirmed victims numbered 3: his father, half-brother, and young Karen. Some suspected him in a 1970 disappearance of a local woman, though no charges were ever brought. John Ruthell Henry. John Ruthell Henry's crimes stand out for their particular cruelty. He murdered family members in 2 separate episodes a decade apart, targeting those who should have been able to trust him most. In December 1975, Henry got into a domestic argument with his common-law wife, Suzanne Henry, in Pasco County, Florida. In a fit of rage, he grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed Suzanne to death. He was convicted of second-degree murder in 1976 and served nearly 7 years in prison before being paroled in the early 1980s. The parole board's decision to release him would prove tragically wrong. Upon release, Henry remarried to Suzanne's sister Sharon. The fact that Sharon would marry her sister's killer speaks to either Henry's manipulative abilities or a deeply troubled family dynamic. Either way, the relationship was doomed to end in violence. On December 22, 1985, after an argument in their Zephyr Hills, Florida home, history repeated itself. Henry stabbed Sharon to death with a knife, using the same method that had killed her sister a decade earlier. But Henry wasn't done. What happened next, many viewers will find disturbing. You may want to skip ahead. Knowing he had killed again, he fled with Sharon's 5-year-old son, Eugene, his stepson. The following morning, Henry took little Eugene to a pasture near Thonotosasa. There, behind a chicken farm, he stabbed the boy in the neck with such force that it nearly decapitated him. The child's only crime was being a potential witness to his mother's murder. Henry was arrested 2 days later on Christmas Eve, 1985, when police found him hiding in an abandoned trailer. Faced with overwhelming evidence, he confessed to the killings. In 1986, Henry was tried for Sharon's murder. The jury found him guilty of first-degree murder and recommended death. He faced a separate trial for Eugene's murder, where prosecutors showed he had deliberately killed the boy to eliminate a witness. Again, guilty. Again, death. Henry received 2 death sentences, one for murdering his wife and one for murdering his stepson. Combined with his prior homicide, he had now killed 3 family members across 3 decades. His cases went through decades of appeals, including arguments about his IQ and potential intellectual disability, but the sentences were upheld. On June 18, 2014, John Rutho Henry, now 63, was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. He refused a last meal, and in his final statement said that I can't undo what I've done. If I could, I would. I ask for your forgiveness if you can find it in your heart. Witnesses described him as appearing resigned as the lethal drugs were administered at 7:30 p.m. He was pronounced dead at 7:43 p.m. Family members of his victims, relatives of Suzanne, Sharon, and little Eugene, observed the execution in silence. John Henry's case is remembered for its tragic brutality. 3 family members dead, and nearly 30 years on death row before justice was finally served. Thomas Knight. Thomas Tommy Knight, who later adopted the Muslim name Askari Abdullah Muhammad, holds the dubious distinction of being one of the few American inmates to receive 3 separate death sentences. Knight's murderous career began in July 1974. He and an accomplice abducted a Miami area couple, Sidney and Lillian Gans, at gunpoint. Knight forced Mr. Gans to drive to a secluded area, where he then executed both husband and wife with gunshots. The bodies were dumped in the woods, and Knight made off with cash from Gans's business payroll. He was captured and in 1975 was convicted of the double murder, receiving a death sentence for each victim. While on Florida's death row in 1980, Knight proved that prison walls couldn't contain his violence. On October 12, 1980, he and another inmate orchestrated a bold escape attempt at Florida State Prison. During the breakout, Knight took a 27-year-old correctional officer, James Burke, hostage. When Officer Burke resisted or tried to intervene, Knight stabbed him to death. The escape attempt failed, but Officer Burke paid with his life. For murdering the guard, Knight was convicted again in 1983 and received his 3rd death sentence. While on death row, Knight became notorious for continued violence and mental instability. He changed his name to Askari Abdullah Muhammad and spent years appealing his sentences on grounds of mental illness. Nevertheless, his convictions held. By 2013, Knight had been on death row for nearly 4 decades, one of the longest stays in American history, when Florida's governor finally signed a death warrant for the prison guard murder. On January 7, 2014, at age 62, Thomas Knight was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. For his last meal, Knight requested and ate sweet potato pie, coconut cake, banana nut bread, a quarter bottle of Sprite, 2 tablespoons of strawberries, butter pecan ice cream, vanilla ice cream, and Fritos corn chips. In the death chamber, when asked for final words, Knight declined to make any statement. He remained silent, staring at the ceiling as the lethal drugs were administered. Prison officials reported that Knight made a slight nod when the warden asked if he understood the execution procedure, but offered no apology or comment. Thomas Knight was pronounced dead at 6:45 p.m. He had spent 39 years on death row. Jack Harold Jones, Jr. Jack Harold Jones, Jr. was a serial killer whose crimes spanned from Florida to Arkansas, targeting women with a brutality that shocked even veteran investigators. Jones's killing spree began in 1983 in Broward County, Florida, where he raped and strangled 20-year-old Lorene Elizabeth Grammer. This crime went unsolved for years, allowing Jones to continue his predation. In 1991, still in Florida, Jones struck again in Sarasota. he raped and strangled 32-year-old Tricia Stout. For this crime, Jones was convicted of second-degree murder and served a brief prison term before being paroled, a decision that would cost more lives. After his release, Jones made his way to Arkansas. On June 6, 1995, he entered an accounting office in Bald Knob. Inside, he found 34-year-old Mary Phillips working. What followed was horrific. Jones beat, raped, and then strangled Mary Phillips with the cord of a coffee pot. But he wasn't done. Mary's 11-year-old daughter, Lacey, was also in the office. Jones viciously attacked the child, choking her and leaving her for dead. Miraculously, despite severe injuries, Lacey survived the assault. Jones was arrested the next day after witnesses placed him near the scene. In 1996, an Arkansas jury convicted him of capital murder for Mary Phillips' death and attempted murder for the attack on Lacey. They sentenced him to death. Years later, DNA evidence from his cold cases in Florida was matched to Jones, confirming his responsibility for 2 earlier murders. While on Arkansas death row, Jones underwent a transformation. He admitted his crimes and even wrote letters of apology to his victims' families. After 2 decades of appeals, Arkansas scheduled his execution as part of an accelerated schedule in April 2017. On April 24, 2017, 52-year-old Jack Jones was executed by lethal injection at the Cummins unit in Arkansas. For his last meal, Jones had fried chicken, potato logs with tartar sauce, beef jerky sticks, 3 Butterfingers, and a chocolate milkshake. Strapped to the gurney that evening, Jones delivered a final statement lasting about 2 minutes. He turned toward the witness room where Lacey Phillips, Mary's daughter, was present. His final statement was written and contains the following: "When I came to prison, I made up my mind that I would be a better person when I left than when I came in. I'd like to think that I've accomplished this. I practiced Buddhism and studied physics. I met the right people and did the right things. There are no words that would fully express my remorse for the pain that I caused." Jack Jones was pronounced dead at 7:20 p.m. Edward LeGrone. LeGrone's first murder occurred on October 3, 1976, when he got into an argument with Michael Anthony Jones outside a Lucky Lady lounge. The dispute escalated into a fight, and LeGrone pulled out a .38 caliber revolver, shooting Jones in the head before firing the remaining shots into his body. LeGrone waived his right to a jury trial and was convicted of murder, receiving a 20-year sentence. However, shockingly, he served only 7 years before being released in 1984. After his release, LeGrone struggled to find work due to his criminal record, but eventually found a factory job. In 1985, he began a relationship with Pamela Lloyd, frequently staying at her apartment where she lived with her children and relatives. Despite his new relationship, LeGrone continued his criminal behavior, sexually assaulting teenage girls and threatening to kill them if they told anyone. In 1990, LeGrone started sexually assaulting his girlfriend's 9-year-old daughter, Shakisha. The abuse continued for about a year until the child began complaining about her stomach. When taken to John Peter Smith Hospital, doctors made the shocking discovery that at only 9 years old, she was 17 weeks pregnant. The family immediately cut contact with LeGrone and filed charges for sexual assault. He attempted to bribe Pamela with $1,500 to drop the charges, but she refused. Angered by their refusal to comply, LeGrone began threatening to kill the family if they didn't drop the charges. When threats failed, he had his new girlfriend purchase 2 Winchester model 1,300 12-gauge shotguns from the Winchester Gallery and Museum. He couldn't legally buy the firearms himself, being a convicted felon. On May 31, 1991, LeGrone went to the Lloyd apartment and knocked on the door. When 48-year-old Uncle Dempsey opened it, Legrone shot him in both arms, though he survived. Legrone then entered and found 10-year-old Shakisha, shooting her in the head. He proceeded to murder her two great-aunts, 90-year-old Zenobia Anderson and 83-year-old Corolla Lloyd, who was blind and deaf. While Legrone was inside, Dempsey, Pamela, and the remaining children escaped and called police. Legrone fled, but was soon arrested at his girlfriend's apartment in Arlington. At trial, witnesses testified they heard Legrone's voice between the shots and saw him leaving afterward. Dempsey Lloyd identified him as the shooter, and his girlfriend testified about purchasing the shotguns. Additionally, two of Legrone's own sisters testified that he had sexually assaulted them at gunpoint in 1986 at Sunrise Elementary School, but that they hadn't reported it because he threatened to burn their house down. Paternity tests also confirmed that he was the father of Shakisha's unborn child. The jury found him guilty on all charges and sentenced him to death. Over the following years, Legrone continued to declare his innocence and had 7 additional paternity tests conducted, all confirming he was the father. On February 11, 2004, Edward Legrone was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit. His last words were, "I just want to say I'm not sad today. I'm not bitter with anyone. As I've said from day one, I didn't go in there and kill them, but I'm no better than the people that did. Jesus is Lord." Donald Beardsley. Donald Beardsley was a California serial killer whose homicidal pattern showed he couldn't be rehabilitated. He killed, was imprisoned, then killed again upon release. Beardsley's first known murder occurred in 1969 in Missouri. He strangled 25-year-old Laura Griffin, a female acquaintance. Convicted of second-degree murder in 1970, he served about 8 years before being paroled in 1977. Once free, Beardsley moved to California. By 1981, he had fallen back into criminal behavior. In April of that year, he became embroiled in a dispute over a small drug debt in Redwood City. On the night of April 24, 1981, Beardsley and 2 accomplices lured 2 young women to his apartment under false pretenses. The victims were 19-year-old Stacy Benjamin and 23-year-old Patricia Trish Gettling. Once the women were inside, Beardsley attacked. He bound and gagged Stacy, then turned his attention to Patricia. He cut her throat and stabbed her multiple times, killing her in his apartment while Stacy was forced to wait, knowing her fate. After murdering Patricia, Beardsley and an accomplice drove Stacy, still bound, to a remote area of Napa County. There, Beardsley shot Stacy twice in the head, killing her and dumping her body off a rural road. Both women's bodies were later found, and Beardsley was arrested within days. Patricia's blood in his home and witness statements tied him conclusively to both murders. In 1984, a San Mateo County jury convicted Donald Beardsley of first-degree murder for both killings. The aggravating factors, his prior murder in Missouri and the cruel premeditation of the double murder, led to a death sentence. Beardsley spent 20 years on San Quentin's death row. His appeals, which included claims of ineffective counsel, were all rejected. At age 61, he was one of the oldest inmates facing execution in California. Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger reviewed and denied his clemency request. In the early morning of January 19, 2005, Donald Beardsley was executed by lethal injection at San Quentin State Prison. Prison officials provided the standard meal of chili, macaroni, mixed vegetables, salad, and cake, but Beardsley refused. He accepted only a glass of grapefruit juice shortly before execution. When asked for a final statement, Beardsley declined to speak, quietly shaking his head instead. He was pronounced dead at 12:29 a.m. Family members of his victims witnessed the execution and remarked that Beardsley showed more dignity in dying than he had ever shown his victims. Donald Beardsley's criminal history included 3 known murder victims, Laura Griffin in Missouri, and the 2 young California women. His case demonstrated the tragic consequences of paroling violent killers who go on to kill again. Burt Leroy Hunter. Burt Leroy Hunter was a Missouri serial killer who targeted acquaintances in acts of revenge and greed spanning 2 decades. Hunter's first known killing occurred in 1968 in Kansas City when he was 21. During a tavern burglary, Hunter shot the tavern owner to death. Convicted of second-degree murder, he served 12 years in prison before being paroled in 1980. After his release, Hunter moved to rural Missouri. For several years, he managed to stay out of serious trouble, but the violence that had claimed his first victim was merely dormant, not gone. In August 1988, Hunter, now 41, partnered with an accomplice named Thomas Irvin to rob an elderly woman, 78-year-old Mildred Hodges, and her adult son, 49-year-old Richard Hodges. The victims were family friends who lived in a farmhouse near Marshall, Missouri. On August 2, 1988, Hunter and Irvin went to the Hodges home under the pretense of a social visit. The mother and son welcomed them, having no idea of their visitors' true intentions. Once inside, Hunter and Irvin revealed their plan. They ambushed the mother and son, tying them up with electrical cords. What followed was particularly cruel. Hunter wrapped Mildred Hodges' head tightly in a plastic bag, suffocating the elderly woman. He then strangled and suffocated Richard as well, ensuring both victims died. The pair stole some cash, a rifle, and the family's car before fleeing. The bodies were discovered the next day, and police quickly focused on Hunter, who had known the victims. Within 2 weeks, both Hunter and Irvin were arrested in Kansas. When confronted with evidence, Hunter confessed to his role in the murders. In 1989, a Missouri jury convicted Burt Hunter of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced him to death. His accomplice, Irvin, also received a death sentence. Hunter spent 11 years on death row. His appeals raised issues of mental competency. Hunter had an IQ around 80 and a history of substance abuse, but courts found him competent and upheld the death sentence given the heinous nature of the crimes. On June 28, 2000, 53-year-old Burt Hunter was executed by lethal injection at the Potosi Correctional Center in Missouri. For his last meal, he requested T-bone steak cooked medium rare, fried chicken, baked potato, corn on the cob, apple pie, and a Coke. Hunter offered a brief final statement, saying he was sorry for what he had done and hoped God would forgive him. As the lethal drugs took effect, his last words were, "I'm going home to be with the Lord." Burt Hunter was pronounced dead at 12:14 a.m. The surviving Hodges family members watched nearby, feeling justice for their murdered mother and brother. Hunter had 3 known victims, the tavern owner in 1968 and the Hodges mother and son in 1988. He was also suspected in the unsolved murder of a transient in the late 1970s. Terry Lee Hankins. Terry Lee Hankins committed one of the most devastating cases of familicide in Texas history, murdering 5 of his own relatives between the year 2000 and 2001. Hankins' killing spree began in October with an argument with his estranged half-sister Pearl Sevenstar, who was 20 years old. During the confrontation, Hankins struck Pearl multiple times in the head with a car jack, killing her. Rather than report the death or seek help, Hankins hid Pearl's body in an abandoned car at his father's auto shop. A week later, tensions with his father, 55-year-old Ernest Hankins, reached a breaking point. During their confrontation, Ernest brandished a gun, but Terry managed to wrestle it away. He then shot his father in the head, killing him instantly. Again, Hankins concealed the crime, hiding Ernest's corpse in a mobile home. For months, Hankins maintained an elaborate deception. He told people his father was ill and his sister had run off, while continuing to run his father's auto business as if nothing had happened. But the worst was yet to come. On August 26, 2001, Hankins went to the Arlington, Texas mobile home of his estranged wife, 34-year-old Tammy Hankins. In the early hours of August 27th, while Tammy and her children slept, Hankins entered with a handgun. He shot Tammy in the head as she lay sleeping. Then, in an act of unfathomable cruelty, he went to the children's bedroom. There, 12-year-old Kevin Galley and 11-year-old Ashley Mason, Tammy's son and daughter, lay in their bunk beds. Hankins shot each once in the head at point-blank range. When Tammy failed to show up for work, police were called, and they discovered the horrific scene, a mother and two children executed in their sleep. Hankins became the prime suspect immediately, and 2 days later, police tracked him to his girlfriend's apartment. He engaged in a 5-hour armed standoff with SWAT teams before finally surrendering peacefully. In custody, Hankins confessed not only to murdering Tammy and the children, but also revealed he had killed his father and half-sister months earlier and led police to their remains. In 2002, Hankins went to trial for the murders of Tammy and the two children. His detailed confession and the evidence were overwhelming. A Tarrant County jury convicted him and sentenced him to death. On June 2, 2009, 34-year-old Terry Hankins was executed by lethal injection in Huntsville, Texas. In his final statement, Hankins addressed both the victims' families and his own. His voice quavered with emotion as he said, "I am sorry for what I've done and for all the pain and suffering my actions have caused. Jesus is Lord. All glory to God." Terry Hankins was pronounced dead at 6:19 p.m. Terry Hankins' 5 victims, his father, half-sister, wife, and 2 stepchildren, made his crime one of devastating family annihilation. Alton Coleman. Alton Coleman's name became synonymous with terror across the Midwest during his 1984 multi-state killing spree that left at least 8 people dead. Often accompanied by his girlfriend Deborah Brown, Coleman committed a series of murders across Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio between May and July 1984. Their victims ranged from a 9-year-old girl to elderly adults. Coleman showed no pattern in choosing victims beyond vulnerability. In Waukegan, Illinois, he abducted and murdered 9-year-old Vernita Wheat. In Gary, Indiana, he raped and strangled 7-year-old Annie Hill. In Toledo, Ohio, Coleman and Brown bludgeoned 11-year-old Tunny Story to death. The spree continued with adult victims. They killed 25-year-old Donna Williams in Ohio and an elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Gay, in Indiana. In total, authorities confirmed Coleman committed at least 8 murders and 7 rapes, often with extreme brutality. The randomness and viciousness of the attacks created panic across multiple states. The FBI placed Coleman on its 10 most wanted list as the crime spree intensified. Parents kept children indoors, and communities lived in fear of when and where the killer couple would strike next. Coleman was finally caught on July 20, 1984, in Evanston, Illinois, ending the region's nightmare. Over the next 2 years, he faced trials in 3 different states. In Ohio, Coleman was convicted of the torture murder of 15-year-old Marlene Walters and the attempted murder of her husband, whom Coleman had shot and left for dead. He received a death sentence. He also received death sentences in Illinois for other murders. Coleman's behavior in court was so erratic and disruptive that he had to be gagged at times. He showed no remorse, treating the proceedings like a game. After 17 years of appeals, Ohio carried out his sentence first. On April 26, 2002, 46-year-old Alton Coleman was executed by lethal injection at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility. For his last meal, Coleman ordered an elaborate feast: well-done filet mignon, fried chicken breasts, salad with French dressing, sweet potato pie, French fries, collard greens, onion rings, cornbread, broccoli with melted cheese, biscuits and gravy, and a cherry Coke. Strapped to the gurney, Coleman made his final statement, reciting Psalm 23. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He leadeth me to green pastures." He did not apologize. Alton Coleman was pronounced dead at 10:13 a.m. His murderous rampage had left 8 confirmed dead and many more traumatized. His execution brought closure to families across 5 states who had waited nearly 2 decades for justice. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more. And if you haven't yet seen part 1 of this video, watch that by selecting the video on the left-hand side of your screen now. Sharing this video with others who may be interested in criminal justice is one of the best ways to support the channel. Please consider doing so before we part ways. As always, thank you for watching.